That's terrible. You will fail. Good morning. All right. This is me when I was younger, having an argument with my wife. So today I want to talk to you about how to have an argument with your boyfriend and always win. Not true, okay? Remember, everything I tell you is a lie. So, quiet. Today's LLA, in some respects, could be interpreted as a version of college thinking. Maitland's thesis, in some respects, is that the difference between high school and college is argumentation. That even though this is a normative statement, right? You all know a normative statement. Even though this is a normative statement, I think it could be argued, there's that word, argued. I think it could be argued that Maitland's thesis is the difference between high school and university is that in high school, information is mainly presented as unchangeable fact about which there is very little question. But in contrast, in university, courses and materials should, even if they don't, revolve around issues and arguments. Not about what is true, but about what is known to be true, how it's to be analyzed, how it is to be understood. So university education should be more about argumentations, questions, and interpretation rather than just absorbing information. So that brings me to number one. And what is an argument? All right. If you look at your handout, I was a very kind lecturer, and I gave you the definition in writing. And I'd like you to read it over with me because it's really critical to my lecture. Of course, argument is not a quarrel, right? In Japanese, it's not kenka. In fact, as I've stated here from the Little Brown Handbook, argument is writing that attempts to solve a problem, open readers' minds to an opinion, change readers' own opinions, or move readers to action. Now, digest that a little bit. There's a lot in that definition. It's not a simple definition of an argument. It's very specific, but it's very expansive at the same time. Now, I'm having a hard time talking because some of you want to talk. If you want to visit, please leave, okay? Go outside the lecture hall. All right. So, one of the things that I've just done is an important rhetorical move in the university. And it's part of argumentation. And that is, I have defined my terms. Right? Define my terms. It sounds simple, but I've defined what I mean by argument and argumentation. And as you can see from this definition, or if you compare this definition to various dictionaries, my definition is quite a bit different. Right? So, in academic discourse and in a lot of your courses, one of the things your professors will do or should do is define key terms and critical terms. And that's what you will be doing in your research writing and in your argumentative writing. One of the first things you do in an essay is define your key terms very explicitly so that the reader, or in this case the audience, knows what we are talking about. All right. Let me advance on. Well, there's the definition of an argument. All right. It's not enough sometimes just to define with words or say what something means. It's good to give an example. So let me give a couple of examples. All right? So first example of an obvious argument is, I could give an example about Japanese immigration. One argument about immigration to Japan is, for example, Japan should allow greater immigration because people, in particular immigrants, are needed to do crucial jobs. For example, care for the elderly, construction, foreign language work, etc. And number two, in an increasingly global economy, ethnic diversity helps a national economy. So I've just made a point. I've made an assertion. I've made a claim. I've said that Japan should allow more immigration. It's an argument that I'm making, and I'm using supporting points and presumably rational evidence to support it. So that's one kind of argument that we see in the university and also in society. Hopefully in the university it's more rational. Sometimes it's in society, it can become racist or emotional or irrational. Sometimes in the university too, but we hope not. But that kind of argument isn't the only kind of argument that we make in the university. Another example could simply be a comparison of two novels, of two versions of history, or even of two movies. All right. Here's an example of an argument, another argument. Lord of the Rings is a better movie than Dragon Ball. Okay? Why? Well, I think in the university, we don't just say, oh, because I like it. Right? But we want to give reasons, good reasons for our beliefs, like Malin argues. And I think in this case, for example, a movie critic or a good university student might argue that The Lord of the Rings is a better movie than Dragon Ball for three reasons. The first, deeper characters. The second, better cinematography. The third, it deals with deeper and more significant themes. And then I could use evidence and examples to support each of these points. Of course, someone might even argue the opposite, especially someone who loved anime or who loved Dragon Ball, and said, they might argue that no, Dragon Ball is a better movie because nantoka nantoka. But the important thing is to present your thought rationally and with supporting evidence, and as a clear thesis. Okay. Number two, thesis, making a claim. Sometimes university students are a little bit confused because in English there are many synonyms for the word thesis or even argument. And among them are, I've been very kind and written them down for you, making a claim, or an assertion, a contention, a main point, an organizing idea. Even between LDH and Malin, there is some difference between the terms, but basically they mean the same thing. It means to make a point that can be supported with evidence, to present an argument. All right. Now, in the university, a claim needs to be arguable. And let me give you some examples of claims that are not arguable. All right? I don't like Dragon Ball, or I don't like Kami Kokami. My boyfriend is a jerk. sushi tastes good. Now, each of these statements are emotional statements or matters of taste. Right? You can't say, no, sushi doesn't taste good. Right? Well, it depends on your personal taste. It's not really open to kind of rational argument. Relationships are usually about emotions. So you might have an argument about whether someone is kind or respectful, but whether you like someone or not, or whether they are a jerk or not, and guys, I'm not discriminating, okay, is besides the point. Here are some other examples. America is a big country. About 55% of high school graduates in Japan go on to further schooling. These are not claims because they are facts. Right? Facts are just statements about what is. In this case, these happen to be true statements. About 55% of high school graduates in Japan, as you remember from my lecture last week, go on to further schooling. Here's another fact. The ELA is great. Okay, I told you everything I say is a lie, right? But just checking you on that one. All right, so let's take a look at some examples, some more examples of arguable claims. Here's an arguable claim. Japanese high school students should have school on Saturdays. Or should not have school on Saturdays. This has really been a topic of debate in the Ministry of Education and in the public and in many schools, especially private schools, for about 20 years. And it's a very interesting argument. Another possible claim or argument, ICU students ought to be able to choose whether or not to take ELA. For this argument, you can present evidence, you can talk about academic freedom, ability to concentrate on majors, the right to do what you want to do. I'm not sure if that's a good argument, but there are many possible kind of rational supporting claims that you could make for this argument. Now, here's another example of a claim or a rational argument. High school work is not sufficient preparation for college work because in college, materials are treated as beliefs or conclusions reached through investigation. Do you recognize that? Where's that from? Where? Yes, that's a tough one, all right? It's from Malin. I think Malin himself, in his article, presents a very good model for what an argument is and how information in university is presented. As a claim backed up by supporting reasons and evidence. All right. Let's take a deeper and a little bit different look at argumentation, and let's go on to 3. Rational versus emotional appeals. Obviously, in the university, we stress rational argument. I think Malin's example is a very revealing one. Do you remember the example of the kidnapped businessman? So, the businessman is kidnapped, and his wife has a dream about where he is being held. And should we trust her dream, or should we trust the careful investigative work of the detectives and the police who have done research and followed up leads and investigated and determined that the businessman is being held by the criminals in this particular location. Okay? I think through Malin's example, we would probably, especially if it were our husband or our wife or our child, we would probably trust the police. It doesn't mean that uranai are not fun. I mean, you can go to Kichijoji on a Saturday evening and they can read your poem, and that's kind of fun, but it's not the same, just like a dream, it's not the same as rational evidence. Now, in contrast, advertising is everywhere in our society. And I think advertising presents a very helpful or heuristic contrast between rational arguments and advertising. I'm loving it. Is that a rational argument? Not really, right? It's not true that advertising never presents rational arguments. Rarely, I mean on some occasions, there are some rational arguments or there's some data, but generally advertising appeals to other parts of our, not to reason, but sometimes to envy or to aspiration or to our emotions. Drive your dreams. What is this an advertisement for? You know this ad, don't you? Toyota, right? Okay. Can you drive your dream? Probably not, right? When I woke up this morning, I took out my key and I tried to drive my dream, but the engine wouldn't start. So, drive your dreams. Actually, I know the woman whose voice you've heard many times. Kimberly says, drive your dreams in the advertisement. She's a friend of mine. That's not Kimberly though, okay? So, ads appeal to desire, pride, and vanity. For example, it's very interesting for many car advertisements. I don't know, guys, why this is, but for many car advertisements, there's a really beautiful girl next to the car or lying on the car, right? But if you buy the car, you don't get the girl, all right? You only get the car. But still, the girl, the pretty girl, is put next to the car. Okay. Sounds strange. Are we so stupid? Okay. But they spend a lot of money. I mean, many 100万yen, many senmai yen to run these advertisements. So it's obvious that they are appealing to deep parts of the human being that are not rational. Now, let me give you another example of a rational argument. In contrast to advertising appeals, rational appeals want you to understand and to reason, to give good reasons and to provide supporting evidence. This is an important distinction. It's not just that I am making the argument, but it is that when we make the argument in the university, we go through this process, as Malin tells us, because our beliefs are more likely to be true and they are more likely to stay with us longer. So in the university, when we make an argument, we are reasoning in order to understand and to persuade and to have the listener or the audience understand the argument. Toyota doesn't care if you understand driving your dreams, just wants you to buy the car. So we want to kind of reason together, all right? Here's an example. we need to eliminate the death penalty for 3 reasons. It is a moral contradiction. For example, if it's wrong to kill someone, isn't it a moral contradiction for the state to kill someone? Now you can make a distinction between the people being killed, but if it is morally wrong to purposefully end a life, then why is the criminal killed by the state? There's a moral contradiction, a logical contradiction. A second argument would be that it's not reversible. It cannot be reversed. And we know from experience, from case studies, from statistics, there's massive evidence that legal systems make mistakes in finding people guilty. In every country in the world, there are people who have been convicted of crimes they did not commit. Happens over and over and over. All right. And when you put someone in prison, they can be released if they are found to be innocent. Maybe there are DNA tests, or 20 years later, another person can come forward and say, I'm very sorry, but I was the one who killed the man, or I was the one who killed the child, not the person in prison. And then the person who is in prison can be released. But if you have executed someone, as far as I know, you cannot bring them back to life, right? So that's a second reason. And the third reason is that it can be argued it does not result in a decrease in crime. In fact, one of my students wrote a position paper about this last week and made this argument that if we look at, for example, in the United States, you can compare one state that has the death penalty and another state right next to it that doesn't. And we see no decrease in murder, for example, in a state where there is the death penalty. Usually when people kill someone, they are not thinking in advance like, oh, maybe there will be the death penalty. We can also look at certain countries, like Canada, that had the death penalty and then stopped it. Is there a rise in the murder rate or not? There are even places that had the death penalty, didn't have it, then they had it again. So there's lots of evidence. And actually, just to give you a little bit the end of the argument, most of the statistics and facts seem to support the argument that the death penalty has no deterrent effect. It doesn't lower the crime rate. In fact, in some cases, it raises the crime rate. You know why? It can become a form of suicide, meaning some people don't want to kill, they want to kill themselves, but they don't have courage. And so they kill someone else knowing that they themselves will be put to death. Sounds strange, okay? But there is some evidence for this. All right. So here's an example of a rational argument. Now, what are the ways to support arguments? Some of this you already know, but probably not systematically and close up. So, first of all, facts. What are facts? Well, facts are things that are known to be true based upon widespread observation or experimentation. We can define facts as things that are true whether we believe them or not. For example, the classic one is the earth is round. There are still some people today who don't believe the earth is round. You know, we have lots of data, we have pictures, but they don't believe it. But it's a fact whether they believe it or not. And the evidence points to that fact. Probably a fact that some people dispute is that the Earth is growing warmer. That still hasn't been settled entirely. Not 100% people believe it. But I think the statistics that I've seen is that 95% of scientists with expertise in this area, they don't believe it as a theory, they believe it as a fact. They've looked at the data, they've looked at the rising temperatures, they've looked at the declining ice caps, and even though there are some places that have a cold day or some places get snow, it seems a fact that globally, in general, the climate is changing and temperatures are increasing. So based upon empirical, usually scientific evidence. So facts are an obvious way to support an argument. Now, I probably can't support my argument about the Lord of the Rings with facts so much as interpretation, but certainly I can support an argument about the death penalty and about whether it increases or lowers crime rates with facts. Now, when analyzing or making an argument using facts, you can't just say, oh, it's a fact, it's a fact. Of course, it's more complex than that. There are some questions that need to be asked. What kinds of facts are good evidence? Here is one. Is it accurate and up to date? Number two, is it relevant? Okay. Is it accurate and up to date? Is it relevant? Particularly in fields related to technology or medicine, being up to date is really important. If you are reading facts that are 20 or 30 years old about DNA, probably the analysis or statistics are not very relevant because the data is old. On the other hand, if you are reading facts about Shakespeare's life, probably those facts are still pretty reliable because Shakespeare has been dead for 300 years and we really haven't learned a lot more about his life in that time. So, facts. Are they relevant and are they up to date? All right. Let me go back to this for a second. Are they relevant? I want to give you an example. Right now, in the United States, for example, as you know, gun control is a big issue. And people can have their own handguns, and a lot of arguments are being made. One fact that is sometimes used to support the argument for more gun rights means people being able to possess, buy, possess, and own their own firearms, is that in Israel, there is one gun, an average of one gun in every household. One gun in every household. And the murder rate is very low. Okay? The rate of crimes being committed with guns is extremely low. So sometimes in the United States, this fact is used to support the argument that guns don't cause crime, criminals cause crime using guns. Now, this appears to be relevant, but there are some important differences. This is just an example. All right? Number one, the type of gun is different. The common type of gun in Israel is a military weapon. It's a rifle. It's not a handgun. All right? So the gun is different. It's hard to take that to a gas station and steal the money, right? Because everybody can see you coming, all right? So number one, the type of gun is different. Number two, Israel has very strict laws about gun storage. And when you have a gun in the house, it has to be in a safe, in a locked safe. And the ammunition, the bullets, must be kept separately, in a separate locked place. So, number one, they are not under the pillow, okay? Number two, the ammunition is separate. And number three, they are locked, all right? So, those facts are different. And number three, the people who own the guns are different. And what do I mean by that? Maybe you don't know this, but in Israel, every person, man and woman, must go into the army. Everyone has to serve in the military. Right? So the Israelis who are your age, actually who are a year older, almost all of them are not sitting in classrooms like you. They are getting gun training. So almost every Israeli has extensive experience and training with guns and gun safety. So in this question of relevance, you can use a fact. You can use a fact in this argument and say, Israel has an average of one gun in every household, and the murder rate and crime rate are very low. Therefore, there's no problem with the same kind of law or same kind of policy in the United States with gun rights. And yet, the Israeli example is not relevant. Right? So that's an important consideration when using facts. All right. Statistics. Now, what are statistics? Again, I'm going to define a term for you. Statistics are numerical facts. Right? They are facts presented in numerical form. Now, statistics don't occur in nature, all right? If we go into the ICU, International Forest, and we look around, we can't find a statistic. They're created by human minds. Therefore, you need to document or cite where they came from. Okay. Now, let me give you an argument related to statistics, all right? Are you ready? I want you to use your critical facilities, critical minds on this. All right. Cell phones, and this is true, okay? Cell phones are even more dangerous than alcohol for auto safety. In 40% of all fatal car accidents studied, one of the drivers was texting or talking on a cell phone. In only 20%, one of the drivers was legally drunk on alcohol. Right? So this is data from a particular US state. So they studied all the fatal car accidents. Fatal car accident means an accident in which someone was killed. And in 40% of them, there was a cell phone involved. Someone was talking or texting. But in only 20% was somebody drunk. So therefore, you could argue that cell phones are more dangerous. Okay. Any questions about these statistics? All right. Well, there are a number of problems, all right? First of all, maybe there are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of more drivers who are using cell phones when they're driving than people who are drinking. So when we make the comparison, it's not of the same number of people. Okay? And number two, what is the definition of legally drunk? It varies a great deal from place to place, actually. So in Japan, for example, if you have more than about one beer, if you have almost any alcohol on your breath and you are caught driving, you are legally drunk. When I was growing up in Minnesota, and I did this as a test, okay? I could drink 6 beers, and I was not legally drunk. I could still drive a car. Okay? Varies a great deal. Even if you go across a state line, the definition of legally drunk can change. So when we look at statistics, we have to ask ourselves, are the comparisons valid? What do they mean? Okay. Now, oh, sorry, I should have put that up on the. That's not me, okay? I never text and drive. By the way, I think we should arrest people for texting on their phones while riding a bicycle. That's next. All right. Now, when analyzing an argument, or making an argument using facts or statistics, we need to not only ask how accurate and up to date they are, but are they from a trustworthy source? What are trustworthy sources? These days, all you have to do is type something into Google, right? And you can find information. But the challenge is to know what is reliable and what isn't. So obviously, we need to see, did the facts or statistics come from a reliable source? Was it the WHO, the World Health Organization website? Was it, if it's about a disease, was it the Mayo Clinic? Was it the Center for Disease Control? Is it a reliable government website? Is it written by a professor we can trust? Is it published by a publisher, for example, Obunsha or Kenkyusha or Harvard University Press, that is reliable and that tries to fact check its work? Next, are the terms clearly defined and the comparisons valid? All right. Earlier, I gave you the example of firearm. What kind of weapon or firearm? Is it a pistol or is it a rifle? I used the example of legally drunk. What does legally drunk mean? I don't think there's any problem with the word fatal. We know fatal is a pretty clear word, means dead. So a fatal accident doesn't present problems. But there are other words that are much more slippery. Words like poverty. What is poverty? Poverty is usually defined by what? An individual person or a family of four receiving a certain level of income. But Akita-ken is different than Tokyo. New York City is different than Worthington, Minnesota. So these kinds of comparisons and these definitions are very slippery. How about something like literacy? Literacy means the ability to read. There are many, many definitions of literacy. Does it mean reading at a 5th grade level? Does it mean reading at a 9th grade level? Does it mean being able to read the directions on medicine or read an encyclopedia? How you define literacy or illiteracy will have a huge impact on your argument. Now, I want to give you an even stronger example. And this is true, okay? I'm not telling you a lie. Almost every few weeks, or even every day, we see in the newspaper employment and unemployment rates. Okay? We see, unemployment is at 4%, or unemployment is at 5 or 6%. But what does that mean? Do you have any idea? In Japan, if you work more than 2 hours a week, 2 hours a month, you are considered employed. If you work 3 hours a month, can you live off that? No. But that's the definition of employment when you read the government statistics. In the US, it's even crazier, right? Or maybe crazier. Unemployment is measured by someone, by all the people who have applied for jobs within the last, who haven't had a job within the last 16 weeks and have applied for a job. So it doesn't count anyone who has been out of work for more than 6 months. So in both Japan and the US, something very simple like the unemployment rate is defined in wildly different and rather unusual, strange, questionable ways. Okay. Now, another question that we want to ask is significant information omitted? Earlier in the example of Israel, I mentioned about the significant information that was omitted. The types of guns, training of people who have had the guns, and how the guns are stored. Now, what is the most widely circulated publication in the world? What do you think is the most important? In your mind, what magazine is read most widely throughout the world? Asahi Weekly? Time Magazine? Any idea? Actually, it's a magazine called The Plain Truth. Did you know that? Yeah, it's true. The Plain Truth. Now, it's the most popular magazine in the world. Do you believe me? Well, you should, but I am omitting a crucial thing. All right? More than 5 million copies of this are distributed every week. But it's free. You don't have to pay anything for it. It's a religious magazine. So if I claim that it's the most popular or most widely read magazine in the world, based upon publication and circulation, it's true, but I'm omitting significant information. Number one, it doesn't cost anything. And number two, it's mainly given out to evangelical Christians. So we often need to ask, is significant information omitted? All right. All right. Now, final consideration, well, not a final one, but important consideration, expert opinion or testimony, right? Appeals to authority. Now, as you continue on at ICU, your writing is going to kind of go from more personal and kind of more personal based upon your experience, based upon your opinion, and over about 4 years, or even 1 year, it's going to change and be much more research-based, much more based upon statistics, expert opinion, authority, other sources. So, when this happens, we have to ask, can you trust the experts? Often you can't trust the experts, but here are some things. Number one, we have to quote or paraphrase accurately. Okay? And use citations to show the source. I'm not sure about all of you, but most of you by the end of this term or early next term, you should be citing every fact, statistic, quotation, or idea that you get from a different source. Whatever you borrow, whatever you find somewhere else, you need to have a little parentheses and a name or a page number and tell the reader where you got that. Okay. And the question that we ask is the source qualified? Is the source biased? Does the source offer appropriate evidence? Now, In addition, you may want to use personal experience, anecdote, and common knowledge. All right? Now, sometimes students feel that their own experience is irrelevant, that they have to find an authority who says that. And usually that's true, okay, if you're writing about academic topics. But if there's a strong and relevant basis, you can use your own personal experience as evidence. Right? Here are some examples. One thing that should be changed in your high school. Right? You could write an essay about that. You could use facts. You could quote from teachers. You could quote from principals. You could look at your high school publications. You could interview your classmates. But you could also include your own experience because you were there and it was relevant. Let's say at the end of this term, you are writing an essay about language acquisition. For example, how English should be taught, or whether English should be taught in Japanese shogaku. That's a big argument right now in the Ministry of Education and in Japanese public education. If you go to Korea, from first grade, students learn English. And the general level of English in Korea has risen incredibly, especially over the last 7 or 8 years since they began this policy. They don't speak Korean worse because they learn English. In fact, that's an argument that many scholars and politicians have made in Japan. They say, we can't teach English in shogaku because the students must first learn Japanese. And if they don't learn their native language well, then, wow, we're really komateru. That's more important. So only secondarily can they learn English. But experts in bilingual education have really examined this issue over and over and over. And they found that actually, just like you can learn how to play the violin and the piano at the same time, you can also learn 2 languages at the same time, right? There's not necessarily any harm. All right. Next, an essay about intercultural communication. In some sections here, later this term, you may be writing an essay about either this term or next term about intercultural relations. For example, about difficulties in intercultural communication. In that case, maybe you had a homestay abroad, or maybe at that time you will have already been to SOAS or the C program. So your experience will be relevant. Okay. Now, I want to talk briefly about the liberal arts approach. I think one of the things that is unique to a liberal arts approach is the use of a broad range of evidence. Okay? Not just statistics or not just research and not just personal opinion, but using a kind of hybrid approach. Expert opinion, facts, statistics. I'd like you to take out the ELA reader if you have it. If you don't have it, just share it with someone next to you. And go to page 14. Number 114. All right. If you go to line 30, students, if you don't have it, don't worry, I'll read it out loud to you. If you go to line 14, to page 14, line 30, it says, the following types of evidence are used in justifying beliefs and making arguments in college courses. All right? Number one, evidence from personal experience, including personal knowledge and anecdotes. Right? For example, what happened to you on your home stay, or your own experience of language learning. This can be relevant for an essay on those topics. Number two, evidence from interviews, questionnaires, and surveys. Now, one thing to remember is that you can create your own evidence. Especially sometimes second, third, and fourth year students, they think they have to find it in a book. But the highest form of investigation, for example, when you get a Hakase Rongun, it usually revolves around research that you yourself have done. So for example, maybe you are writing about propaganda. You go to Yasukuni Jinja, and you go to the museum, and you analyze the language that is used. Maybe you interview the director of the museum and ask some questions and get some quotations. This is called primary research. Primary research means you are the one who does the research. Actually, this is a lot what Morgan is talking about, curiosity. Those of us who have big curiosities often like to do our own primary research, to do our own studies. All right, number three, evidence from reading and research, including established facts, examples, illustrative cases, expert opinion from authorities, historical record, illustrations. 4, statistical data, such as graphs, charts, tables from empirical studies. 5, hypothetical examples, cases, scenarios, including thought experiments. Now, this is a very neglected form of evidence. Malin uses it in college thinking with the example of the kidnapped businessman. Right? He says, imagine. Right? It didn't really happen, but he creates a hypothetical scenario. Did you know that Einstein did the same thing? Einstein, to come up with his theory of general relativity, he imagined what would the universe be like if I were riding on a beam of light across the universe. It was a hypothetical case. It was a thought experiment. So thought experiments, well, maybe drive your dreams is a thought experiment. But thought experiments are particularly common and useful in things like philosophy, but in other fields too, where you imagine a scenario and you draw deductions from it, or possibly you make inferences. Number 6, reasoned sequence of ideas, including inductive, deductive logic, logical progression of ideas, argument from analogy, definitions and distinction, and careful description. All right. So, in my opinion, these 6 points here are the most important thing in the ELA reader. I think you could copy these and put them above your computer, and you could probably use them for the next 4 years. They will help you not only understand and analyze arguments, but also they will help you generate evidence to support arguments. When I'm writing an article myself, sometimes I'm reaching for evidence. I'm wondering, what can I use to support this point? And I go to this book, and I look at this, and I go down the list, and I go, hold on. I could create or find evidence using one of these points. All right. Okay. Another important principle of good research and good evidence is to go to the source. For example, if you are writing about Christianity, go to the Bible. If you are writing about the Japanese Constitution, read the Constitution. Don't read someone else's interpretation of the Constitution. Well, you should read someone else's. But if you're writing about Article 9, go and read it. Actually, the Japanese Constitution, I encourage you, if you haven't read it in high school, read it. It's not very long. It'll probably take you 30 minutes. And one of the remarkable things about the Constitution is it's written in very simple, clear language. A lot of constitutions are written in very complex mumbo-jumbo jargon, very hard to figure out. But the Japanese Constitution is very transparent and clear. And there are amazing things in it. Amazing things about equal rights, about the right to a job. Many things that are actually ignored in practice, but are in the Constitution. So, my point here is, as much as possible, go to the original source. Now, I'm going to give you a minute, and I'd like you to just review steps for analyzing an argument. It's in the handout there. Please go through and read those points. All right. This is a 6-step process for analyzing an argument. Now, this anticipates some reading that you will soon be doing in LDH about arguments, about claims, about logical fallacies. And ideally, I would have had you analyze this argument for analysis, but we really don't have enough time. Now, I want you to keep this because your teachers may ask you to do this. All right? It might be some homework that you do, or might be a group activity in a class or something like that. So these steps for analyzing an argument are meant to be applied to this brief argument that's made.